But the reality for a lot of us today is that as a Black family, when you're upwardly mobile and live an upper middle class lifestyle, it often means that we're the only ones in majority white spaces. And sometimes that upward mobility comes at the expense of our own psychological safety, sense of belonging, and fears about what it means for our Black children and their, sense of self. Hi, I'm Satta, one of your co-hosts of the Sis Please podcast.
And I'm Jaretta, the other half of the Sis Please podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. So, sis, what's up?
I'm good, just hanging in there. It's funny because for the past few weeks, I've been doing a self-imposed Amazon moratorium. Like, I can't buy anything unless it's essential. And the reason I did this was because I'm doing this weight loss fitness program. And so I wanted to tie, achieving my goal to something. And one of the things I tied it to is I can't shop on Amazon until I achieve a specific weight loss goal. Except I gave myself a little out that for essentials, like household essentials and Satta essentials. So this week I had to, buy a household essential or a Satta essential rather, because I couldn't get it in stores. So an essential is anything I can't get in stores, but that I can easily get on Amazon. So you know what this essential purchase was that I had to make?
What was it?
I had to buy crochet braids.
Listen, you could have went back home because we're right next to a beauty supply store.
I'm not going to drive 30 minutes each way to go buy crochet braids when I can just get it on Amazon within like a day or two. And so that's exactly what I did. That was an essential purchase in my book. So, and two, like my town where I live, there's no Black beauty supply stores at all. Maybe there's one close by in another town. I didn't do my research, but I wasn't going to drive to Providence just to buy hair when I can just in a few clicks get what I need. So I did that. So that was the essential purchase I've made. I've been good otherwise, even though there's been other things I wanted to buy. I just have a whole bunch of things in my save for later bucket on Amazon. But I also started like last week reading this book or listening to this book called The Mamas by Helena Andrews Dyer. She's a Washington Post reporter. And the book is all about her experiences as a Black mom during the pandemic in this rapidly gentrifying Washington, D.C. neighborhood. And she just explores the differences between Black moms and white moms and some of the nuances there. And it's funny. So one anecdote in the beginning of the book that she talks about is taking her daughter, who I think maybe was like 15 months old or just a year old at the time, to the socially distant outdoor play date, like in the middle of winter. And she was like, my Black ass knew, and she was the only Black mother there. She was like, my Black ass knew better than to take my baby outside to sit outside for like 30 minutes for a play date, And her daughter ended up, I don't know, like getting a cold or something like that. And she was like, Black folks don't sit outside and do this kind of stuff during the winter time. So it was just funny. And it kind of connects to what we're going to talk about today, which is the cost of being upwardly mobile as a Black family and living up to this aspirational Black family archetype, which I think is so well embodied for a lot of us in the Huxtables, which is why the episode is called Should We All Live the Huxtables Dream? And I know you did not watch the Cosby Show. I'm sure you maybe caught it on reruns, but like what do the Huxtables mean to you in terms of that aspirational Black family?
I feel like every time when we talk about pop culture, it's like, you were too young for that. But I even researched this too. Like the Cosby Show came out in 1984. Some people's
the year
birthdays.
I was born.
Yep. I was gonna call
the year I was born. Okay. Yeah.
But I think it also happened in the 90s, and I was born in 92. So I don't distinctly remember watching it when I was a kid, though I did catch the rerun. So I'm like, it's not a stage.
But it's just such a part. Okay.
I was like,
I didn't mean to shade you, but it's just the numbers. It's true. But I remember watching that show vaguely when I was like 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
but
Yeah.
it's just such a part of the culture, you probably people in younger millennials probably know about the show too, especially Black younger millennials. But like I said, what does that family mean to you in terms of the aspirational Black family archetype?
Yeah, I definitely watch reruns, but I do remember, when you think about the Huxtables, you think about quote unquote Black excellence. Here, this
Hmm.
lovely Black family, uh, Cliff, Claire. I'm like, I can't
The
never get the,
doctor,
yeah, the
doctor,
doctor, the
lawyer,
lawyer. They have
yeah,
these cute,
five kids, perfect kids,
yeah,
or
they have the 5 kids, the perfect family, moral lessons. And again, like, I remember watching reruns, but even just as we're watching or recording this episode too, I was like doing my little research about like what were some of the criticisms people had of the Cosby Show. And
mm,
some people saying that it was quote unquote whitewashed. And
mm,
during that time in the 1980s was during the Reagan administration, and he had a lot of reforms. But
mhm.
I do remember, when you do think about the Cosby Show, when you do think about the Huxtables family, just Black excellence and how upward mobility works, because not only did they have
Mhm.
these careers, but
They lived in a brownstone in
yeah,
Brooklyn, which
brownstone in
today would
Brooklyn.
probably cost like $30 million. They have
Exactly.
5 kids. Like, to me, that's the ultimate flex when you can live in a nice house and have all those kids. Because today, I don't think a lot of people in our generation are even considering having 5 kids, especially with the cost of daycare and childcare. No, but so
Absolutely not.
they were aspirational in so many different ways, and they live a lifestyle now that maybe many of us can't live just because there is no social safety net. It's sort of like in America, it's like you're on your own, you got to make it on your own. But it's funny with that show, with the Huxtables in particular, they never really addressed the issue of race head on
Yeah.
within the whole theme of upward mobility. But the reality for a lot of us today is that as a Black family, when you're upwardly mobile and live an upper middle class lifestyle, it often means that we're the only ones in majority white spaces. And sometimes that upward mobility comes at the expense of our own psychological safety, sense of belonging, and fears about what it means for our Black children and their sense of self, which is sort of what we want to explore today. So for me and my husband, it was kind of tricky because when we were searching for a house nearly 3 years ago, our priorities were a good school district, safe community, and closer to family. Because we are about an hour away, we wanted to be like around a half an hour, 20 minutes away. So diversity was important, but we knew we weren't going to get it and all these other things we wanted, especially in the Boston area. And, anyone listening is probably well aware of Boston's dicey and complex racial history. It has this weird distinction of being a very liberal place, but it's also one of the most segregated cities in America. And that also trickles down to the surrounding towns and suburbs and communities. So, my husband and I would have loved to find a house in a diverse community. And by diverse, I don't mean just Black. I mean, like truly diverse, but it's just so hard to find that up here in New England in the Northeast, unless you live in Atlanta or something.
Mm.
But the town where we ended up buying a house, it's majority white. And I didn't realize how white. Well, I did, but I was looking up and preparing for this episode, census data, and our town is 94% white and only 2% Black. So, like, when I say majority white, like super majority. So, and we live in a subdivision where there are 65 homes, and we're one of probably only 2 or 3 Black families, and there are a couple of Asian families too. But I would say our subdivision is very reflective of those larger percentages within the town that we live in.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, as you were talking, going back of what you were talking about, being radically diverse, just a quick question. Would you say that growing up, the neighborhood that we grew up in was diverse? I'm just curious.
it was mostly white when we moved in, but I would say 60% or so. And then you saw the white flight happening as more families of color started to move in, like black families, Asian families, like a white person would sell their house and a black person or Asian person would buy it. So like over like 25 years or so, at least when we were growing up, we saw the neighborhood gradually shift and change. Now I would say it's very like racially mixed, but there are far fewer. I'd probably say that the percentage of white folks in the neighborhood we grew up in is half of what it was when we were little.
Yeah.
So, and you see that we've heard about white flight so many times and how that can affect, not just the racial makeup of a neighborhood, but the property values there, because the way people assess property in certain neighborhoods, usually when it's, black and brown people living there, the home values are less than when it's a majority white community, which is honestly something we thought about too. Not like consciously, but like you want to buy a house in a safe, good area because you want your home value to appreciate.
Yeah.
Because you're not just buying a home for your family. This is an investment. And that's how most people build generational wealth, is buying a home. So
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I also too, when you're talking about the property values too, like I remember um distinctly just a couple of years ago, and I'm assuming just during the height of the pandemic, like one of our neighbors had to foreclose on their home, unfortunately. So, but going back, fast forwarding to when you first purchased the house, because it was during 2020, right? So, like the height of the
uh,
pandemic.
2021, like we put in an offer 2020, it was accepted in 2020, and then we didn't end up moving into the house until almost 6 months later. It was just part of the deal that the sellers had to find a new home before we could start the closing process. So yeah, so we found the house in 2020, didn't end up moving in until spring 2021.
So in spring 2021, you and your husband and my great nephew moving into this new home, you're realizing great safe neighborhood, but it is majority white. Like, how does that feel being in a neighborhood again where it's majority white, and like you've mentioned that there's no diversity or racial diversity?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the reality for Black folks, like upwardly mobile Black folks today, is that oftentimes, quote unquote, doing better for yourself means moving into these spaces where you are one of few, and it's like you want a diverse community, safe with good schools. It's like finding a unicorn. It's like a unicorn neighborhood. It's like it doesn't exist. And to be clear, like our neighbors are very nice, really welcoming. One of our neighbors even mowed our lawn before we moved in, because the previous owners, they moved out and they had it mowed because we closed like the end of April, and the grass had already started to grow, but they didn't mow it because they're like, we're moving, whatever. So the front of the yard looked like a jungle. And in my head, I was thinking, I don't want to be we're the Black family moving into this house and our lawn looks like shit. so
y'all really particular about y'all lawns too.
Yes. So, we have a HOA and everything. So I posted in our subdivision in the Facebook group, like, hey, do any of you guys have a teenager come over and mow our lawn or something? And then one of our neighbors, she lives down the street. She was so nice because she had a riding lawnmower. Like she does her own lawn. So, and she said she used to do it in college or something. So she's like, oh, I'll just come over and do it. And she mowed not just our front yard, but our backyard. So when I say our neighbors have been nice and welcoming, I really mean it. Like no one has been like made me feel like, oh, you the Black people moving in here. Like don't mess this shit up. Like don't mess up our neighbor. No one has made us feel like that, but it's just you're conscious of it,
Yeah.
especially for us growing up, the schools we went to, the experiences we've had, we were constantly in a position where we were like one of only a handful, if not the only Black people. But it's just funny because when we have community events, sometimes it feels like, oh, we're the Black family. At least that's how I feel internally. Like you go and everybody else kind of looks the same, but it's like, hi, it's like the three of us, and we're just, it's clear we're different. But we've also made a concerted effort for our neighbors to see and know us. And I think honestly that's for our own safety. Like I don't want my husband be locked out of the house one day and he's trying to get in and someone assumes he's like breaking into our home or trespassing. So like we're friendly, people in general, but we've gone out of our way to like get to know people because we're new and
Yeah.
we're new. You know what I'm
New,
saying?
new. Yeah.
New.
No, I totally agree, and I can see why you feel like, all right, just to appease these folks, like we're here, we're going to stay here. But like I mentioned too, in like a couple of episodes ago too, like sometimes as Black folks, we do have to make a concerted effort. Sorry, we have to make a
An extra effort.
yeah, we have to make a concerted effort, extra effort to extend our hands. And not saying that you guys didn't want to, but just to kind of
Yeah.
appease these folks to be like, listen, we're safe. This is not a get out situation. Like we're
Mhm.
safe. Um,
Yeah, and I think part of the reason too why I may have been a little bit uncomfortable is because when we were doing our house search and we came here, not to our specific subdivision or neighborhood, but when we were driving around, I saw in one part of town, in another neighborhood, there were a bunch of back the blue signs, which is basically like Blue Lives Matter signs,
mm,
in front of several of the houses. Like this one street, like every house had it. And I've also seen signs in a nearby neighborhood in our town that said defund your police. So obviously there are people here who are very pro police, and you know I'm not anti police in any respect. Like police do a very dangerous job putting your life on the line every day. That's serious. A lot of us would not be willing to do that.
yeah,
But the back the blue signs bother me because these signs wouldn't exist without the context of the Black Lives Matter movement.
yeah,
They're a direct response
wants
to
to it.
them. So to me, when I see them, it's like this Black Lives Matter stuff you're talking about is overblown. Like you
Yeah.
guys are playing the race card again. So,
And let me just say,
we're gonna back the police. So I went because I was curious. I was like, where did these signs come from? So when I finally got access to the town's Facebook group, like when we were, I think it was when we were either in the process of closing on our house or we had just moved in. So I was curious where the signs came from. I went into the town Facebook group and there was someone who had posted saying, "Oh, I see these signs on a few people's lawns. I really want one. Where can I get one?" And there were over 100 comments on the post with people asking, like, "Oh, I want one too. I really, let's support the police, blah, blah, blah." And I was just like, "Oh, wait, is this the kind of neighborhood we're moving into?" But on the other hand, I've also seen signs like, I say science is real. Black lives matter. No human is illegal. So, our local coffee shop that my husband goes to like almost every other day has a Black Lives Matter sign posted into it on the window, like a huge Black Lives Matter sign, and it's in our town. So it's a double-edged sword. No place is one thing or the other. It's a mix.
so I'm just curious, like when you like saw the Facebook group and it's like, I want a sign. Did you just kind of look, I need to make sure that I never run across you again. I'm just joking. But
Well, I didn't know these people. I didn't see any of my potential neighbors,
you saw the
commenting.
names just to be like, all right, just curious.
Yeah, yeah. But to be, you live in a town, there are different neighborhoods, different pockets. So it's not anyone, and I don't even remember the names. I just remember the amount of comments. It was like over 100 comments, and I didn't see. And then people liked the post too. The likes were even more than the comments.
Yeah.
So that just signaled to me like, okay, this is what I could potentially be dealing with.
Yeah. And I mean, hopefully anybody who's listening to us, I know will probably attract a lot of Black women, but marginalized women, but we might even have some white listeners, white people
Yeah,
listening.
that would be great.
But I also just want to make this a point.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter is so much more than just, Black people dying in the hands of the police. And even when we just think about like the tragic killing of what we saw with Tyree Nichols, where it was 5 Black officers that was allegedly,
Beating this man to
yeah,
death.
meeting
Yeah.
this man to death. I think it speaks of a larger system of what is the role of the police, and like you said, not negating the hard work that they do, but just thinking about the history of policing and how it was made to keep slaves in line, and now to 2023 where you see Black people um
Unarmed,
yeah,
mostly black
unarmed
men.
and not dangerous. You can't go to sleep while black. You can't drive while black. You can't go to the grocery store while black. You can't do a lot of things while black. And I think,
Hmm.
especially with this case, I think it's just causing people to realize like you can still be a part of a system, uh, look as dark as I am and still be, um, a part of that system. So I just think it's really important for people to note.
Yeah. And I will say I don't it's sort of difficult to know where people stand in my particular subdivision because we have an HOA and we're not allowed to put yard signs up. So, I haven't seen any blue lives matter or back the blue signs in our neighborhood, but that's simply because we are not allowed to put signs up. So, it's like so it's good and bad in a way. Like you don't know where people stand, but at the same time, you want to know where people stand. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's fair enough. When you moved into the neighborhood, I was happy. I'm always happy for my family members, my siblings who are doing great things. So I was happy that, you found a neighborhood, your first home that was safe, that's beautiful. Uh, you feel supported. But I think, like any family member, especially of color, you do feel a sense of, um, you just feel a little bit afraid sometimes because you just never know, and it's a shame that we have to feel this paranoia. But again, what we see in the media at any given moment, we don't know what happened. So I think I did have a little bit of sense of, I knew you were in a safe neighborhood, but I think I was more so thinking about the psychological effects of, again, living in a neighborhood that is majority white and maybe not even having the support or camaraderie or community that says, whereas if you were in a predominantly black or a racially diverse neighborhood. So I did have those concerns. And I know we did some research by Gregory Smith Simon, who explains that black people who live in black neighborhoods, often because they feel like white neighborhoods are unsafe. And then I know there's other opposing research that talks about, um, African Americans wanting to live in neighborhoods that are a mix of like 50 black, 50% black, 50% white people. But like you said, few neighborhoods exist, and I'm sure a lot of people who are purchasing their first home or, building a family of color have to think about these things of like, what are the essentials essentially.
yeah, and it's funny when you talk about safety because there's physical safety and psychological safety.
Yeah.
So you can feel very physically safe in your neighborhood, but not always psychologically safe. And I feel like a lot of upper middle class Black families who live in certain areas of the country, that's the way they feel. Like, because there is no like Black utopia or Black utopian neighborhood. I mean, I reference Atlanta. Maybe in Atlanta there that's where they are because so many Black folks are moving there. There's been talk of this reverse migration,
Yeah.
back to the South from the North, which is compared to after slavery during Reconstruction, there was this huge migration from the North to the South, and now it has reversed. So I'm pretty sure there are developing, if not already, Southern neighborhoods in the South that have good schools, safe, clean, and are very diverse, or if not majority Black. But we're just in a situation where in this area part of the country, that's not the reality for us. And like I mentioned before, in my subdivision, we've had community events, we've had block parties, Easter egg hunts, which are still great. My son loves them. I enjoy them. My husband enjoys them. And there's such a strong sense of community in our neighborhood in that way, which I really appreciate. Like Halloween is big here too. Like people do, you've been here
Yeah, it's
with us for
fun.
Halloween. Like people do like special effects, like pyrotechnics. It's like one house has jello shots. I feel really lucky to live here. Most of the neighbors I've met, I really like them. It's hard because people work, you don't see people all the time. When we have these events, my child is usually, he is the only Black boy, if not one of the few children of color. And I think, that's cute now when he's a toddler, when he's 4 years old. But what could that mean for him when he's a preteen or he's a teenager? and we've talked about in previous episodes like the adultification of black boys, and we've seen that with like Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old and holding a toy gun, and they assumed he was dangerous. And I talked previously about one of my best friends, her son, who was like a toddler, and they're like, oh, he should play football, he's so big, that kind of thing. So when he gets older, I wonder what that means for him if we're still living here. And right now, as far as race goes, my son doesn't really know it any different. Like it's like, he plays with this person, that person, like we're all the same. But I just remember for me as a kid, sometimes I didn't want to stand out. You just want to blend in because it protects you, like the
Yeah.
kids who are bullied aren't the kids who are like everyone else. It's the kids who are different. And maybe it's just me projecting my anxieties and previous experiences onto him, but I also feel like I'm not part of this secret inner circle, as I'm the only black mom, and it can feel like sometimes I'm on the outside looking in, or I'm not. There's no one has been outright rude to me, but it can kind of feel like everyone knows each other. They've already established these bonds. There's this sorority of mothers and women that I'm not a part of. And
Mm.
it's just about how do we relate to each other as like women, as wives and mothers, because my experiences as a black woman, as a black wife, as a black mother are different. And I just move through the world differently and experience the world differently than someone who's white, who may be a woman who's white, who may be my same age. That's not good or bad necessarily. It's just different. It's a fact of living in America in this day and age.
Yeah. And when you talk a little bit about not being fit into this secret society in your neighborhood, so have
Hmm.
you, I guess, put in an extra effort to get to know these moms, like, an extra play date or
Not really,
dinner?
not yet. And I think COVID has a lot to do with that because we basically all been in the house for 2.5 years. We have really great next door neighbors. They also have a son, but he's like older than our son. He's like twice his age. He's like 4 years older than him, 4 or 5. So like it wouldn't make sense to have a play date in that respect, but they've invited us over for dinner and barbecued with us. We've been in their pool. Like our next door neighbors are really cool. Like I feel like they would be people we'd be hang out with and be friends with even if we didn't live right next door to each other. So that's, the only sort of really close interaction we've had. And then the community events, which are not really close. You're having like quick conversations and you're trying to keep an eye on your kid at the same time. And maybe I hope there's an opportunity for that, as we've lived here now almost 2 years, but as we come out of COVID and get more ingrained into the community, I hope, there's an opportunity to forge those kinds of relationships. It's just, this whole feeling of being different and on the outside looking in. It's just, like I said, no one has outwardly made me feel that way, and, sometimes microaggressions are microaggressions because they're subtle, you
Yeah.
know, but
Yeah.
I can't recall anyone outwardly like make me feel like I don't belong.
Yeah.
But, it's just like, and I think, like I said, maybe I'm projecting because I remember feeling the same way as a freshman in college when I was at BU at Boston University. So this was 2002, so like over 20 years ago. And I remember our parents, so it was our mom, my dad, and your dad. And you, I think you were like 10 or 11 years
I was
old.
so young. I remember
Yeah,
that.
moving me into my dorm. And I remember your dad said to me, he was like joking me and ribbing me. He's like, well, Sarah, it looks like you're the only black person here. But it was so noticeable. And BU at the time it has thousands of students. Like when we were moving in that day to my dorm, there were probably like 2, 3, 4,000 people moving in at the
I
same time.
remember.
And we hardly
Saw any
saw
black people.
any yeah. And I hate to use this analogy, but I feel like I stuck out like a sore thumb. Like our family stuck out like a sore thumb. And over 20 years later, it pains me that my child could potentially have that same experience because my husband and I willfully chose to move into a community where we knew we would be one of the only few black people. But I
Yeah.
feel like we had no other choice to a
Yeah.
certain extent.
Yeah. And also just going back to, like, again, we're very fortunate that we had a mom that, was a working mom and really prioritized education and was able to give us the means to go to private. Well, for me, private school. I know you went to a really great public school. But even me,
Mhm.
as you were talking about feeling like a sore thumb, I even remember too, like in high school, going to a majority white Catholic school, and uh, I had a couple of white friends too, but like also feeling like I couldn't even fit in because the apparent microaggressions that I face, as well as like not really even fitting in with the people of color, like the black folks.
Why was that?
I ain't even trying to start no diaspora wars up in here, but it is true. Like,
Like being
African,
African
yeah,
first
being
generation.
African wasn't in. It wasn't hot. This was before Black Panther and people wearing the like,
Now everybody wants to be like
you know,
Wakanda forever, but when we were younger, it's like, oh,
it was
African
not
booty
like that.
scratcher.
And it was
Uh
so
huh.
crazy because like these are folks like some black folks who were either, black American or Cape Verdean or just different parts of the diaspora. So like not even really feeling like I fit in with them. But I remember one time in my sophomore year, I think it was like my 16th birthday party, and one of my white friends like was making like a little joke of like, oh, I can't come to your house because I live in the ghetto. And
He or she was
she
saying that
said that I
you,
lived in the ghetto, and I'm like, you
even though that they had never been to our house,
never been to our house. But I'm like, also
didn't
too,
even know where we lived,
didn't know
really.
where we lived. But then I'm also like, again, everybody has financial means, but it's like mommy was paying for my tuition like out of pocket. So
Yeah, you weren't on scholarship.
yeah, pretty much. So
So what did you say to her when she said
I
that?
was just like, that's really offensive. And, but this was like a constant thing. I remember like just high school being like a constant issue because like there was always issues of race, and like me feeling like not that I was the vanguard of my race, but I was really interested in social justice type stuff. So I think as you were talking about that, it kind of reminded me of my distinct memories growing up in elementary
When you're a
school.
minority in a majority white space, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. It affects so many facets of our lives, like where you buy a home, where you go to school, who you date. Like it's always there in the background. And someone may listen to this who's not black or not a person of color, be like, well, why does it even matter? Like, should I don't see race, I don't see color, which to me is like the most not just offensive, it's the most asinine thing someone can say. Like, I don't see color. Like, we all see it. Let's not be like ridiculous here. But it shouldn't matter. Race shouldn't matter. Like when you're buying a house or when you're going to school, whether you're in high school or college, but it does. The reality is that we live in America, and it's also a privilege to say, oh, well, this is irrelevant, when you've probably never been in a space where you were the odd man or woman out, or where you didn't have to think about your gender or race because everyone in the room for the most part looked like you. So for me, in our situation, I think it'll really be interesting when our son starts kindergarten later this year and we're sort of have to navigate the school system. I'm wondering what things we'll have to confront then, and what discussions we may have to have with him even as young as 5 years old. So, Jared, I'm just curious, basically you have a background in education policy, you have a master's in education policy. Are there, based on what you've studied or your work experience, are there things that like black parents acutely experience in suburban school systems or like non-diverse school systems? Like how do I prepare for that as a black parent, and how do I prepare to advocate for my son, for some of the things he may experience in a majority white school?
Yeah, no, that's a lot. And thanks for asking, sis. um, no, that's a lot. I think a lot of parents face what you face in terms of, again, everybody wants the best for their kids, and you're going to do
Yeah.
anything that you need to make sure that you set your child up for success. So, to anybody who's listening to this, I don't want you to feel like bad, like you're not a sellout. It just also kind of
Yeah.
reminds me too, like my last boss, she's not black at all, but she had talked about her moving to like a whiter district, and she was like, basically confiding to me that she felt like she was a sellout because her son had specific needs, and in the city that she was living in, the public school that he probably wouldn't have the public school that he would have went to was not accommodating to their needs. So she lived in a, 20 minutes over, and kind of was just like wrestling with this idea of, I serve majority Black and brown youth, and what does that look like if I remove my child from that?
Yeah, that's complicated, but at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for your child. You can't make your child a sacrificial lamb just so you can stand on principle. That's
Exactly.
just how I feel.
Yeah,
But
no, and I mean that's valid. I remember even one of our family friends, like we were just talking a couple of months ago, and very prominent in our city, but she has all of her kids, all of her 3 kids go to a pretty private,
expensive private school.
yeah, expensive private school that they've been in, I think, since they were kids. And I think her oldest daughter
But
is
she's a
graduated.
social justice advocate and education equality advocate.
Oh yeah,
So
she does a lot in the community, and kind of had those similar sentiments of like, I'm going to set my children up for success. So
mhm.
kind of going back to my nephew, there's been a lot of studies that show that kids recognize difference as early as 3 years old.
Oh, okay.
So right up your alley, and I think it's never too late for any parent, if they're really committed to equity, social justice, setting your child up for success, to have these conversations. Obviously, it's going to be tailored depending on the age. Um, but I think when it comes to teachers, again, I think we talked in a couple of episodes too of like that adultification piece. So just scoping out like, what is the makeup of the class? What is the makeup of the teachers? Can you ask about the curriculum? Like curriculum has a direct effect to a child's like education and their educational outcomes.
Yeah, I just hope we don't get into there's no like school board discussions or meetings where people are talking about CRT and stop teaching critical race theory
But
because
you can join into those conversations as well,
mhm.
because
Mhm.
I
And
know.
first of all, it's not taught in elementary school. It's a legal theory. It's taught in law school. So anyway, I just had
But
to
then
say
there's
that.
cultural responsive teaching, right? That
Mhm.
celebrates students' differences. And I think sometimes people get that conflated, but I think that's a good point. So does the curriculum that your school's teaching, do they celebrate difference? Like how is that
Mhm.
like manifested in the classroom? Because like you said, my nephew's like the only Black boy in most spaces. And I think there's a lot of things that you and my brother-in-law can do in the home as well. There's this lovely woman that I follow. Her name's Britt Harthorn. She is the
Mhm.
truth. She was a former educator, still is an educator, but now she more so does anti-racism work. And she does
Mhm.
a lot of trainings with teachers and also parents on how to build empathetic, anti-racist children. I'm actually going to send you one of her books, but again, she's
Okay,
the
great.
truth. But she also has a large following on Instagram. And during, unfortunately, during the death of Tyree Nichols, talked a little bit about like how you can talk to your kids about that. And she also talked about, I think she has another post of, a lot of my students have asked me in the past, like, why don't we have a White History Month? I even saw another video of her and her son just talking about like, when you're talking about diversity and racial difference, making sure that you're tying that to the experience of the student, or your child. So I think she just has a lot of good wisdom, tangible ways to build empathetic, anti-racist children and parents. So I would totally recommend that for you and my brother-in-law. And I think also too, um, even though you live in a majority white neighborhood, like, are there any hood adjacent or neighborhoods nearby that you can expose yourselves to? Like, are there any multicultural events? So even though like you live in a primarily white neighborhood, I don't think all is lost. Like, you and your husband have many ways that you can expose my nephew to many different things. It's just finding a way, because we always.
So we've talked a lot about, my experiences so far. And I'm curious, let's say 5 years from now, when, you're married, have a kid, looking for a house, if you want those things, would you prioritize diversity in your house search or would you be willing to live in a hold on, your nephew's coming back. Hold on one second. Let me mute this and try to go downstairs
Yeah, no
and
worries.
get Kyle. Hold on.
I can't hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sorry.
At least he came during the tail end.
I know. I was like, where's Kyle? Like,
Where was Kyle?
he's downstairs. I think he was all up in the football game, the Eagles 49ers game. But anyway,
Yeah. All
so I'll
right.
just start from the top.
All right. 1, 2.
So, Jaretta, I'm curious, like when the time comes, let's say 5 years from now, you're married, have a kid, and are looking for a house, if you want all those things, would you prioritize diversity in your house search, or would you be willing to live in a hood adjacent or slowly gentrifying neighborhood to get the diversity? Or and then would you send your kid to the local public school, or would you send them to private school like we've talked about? Because the reality is, if you live in a community that's quote unquote hood adjacent or in the hood or slowly gentrifying, the public schools may not be as good as certain other communities. So I'm just curious as if you thought about those things and how you would approach it.
Yeah, I think that's all really good questions. I don't want to make it a cop out, but I think it just depends on my spouse and also just the certain learning needs of my child. I think off the top of my head though, I would prioritize first like living in a racially diverse neighborhood. If that was not the case where I felt safe, unfortunately, like I would not unfortunately, but I wouldn't be opposed to living in a majority white neighborhood. I think if that was my second option, then I would kind of really prioritize with my husband, like, okay, given that we're in this majority light white space, what can we do to instill that black girl joy, that black boy joy, and just really prioritizing with our family, like we're here and we celebrate difference. So I think it just depends on the certain needs. In regards to education, that's so hard too. I think with the experience that I have in education policy and working in many schools, um, I'm leaning towards public charter, but I feel like I definitely would be one of those parents that their ass would always be at the parent meetings, curriculum, all that. But again, I'm fortunate in that like I know most public school systems, most private school systems, and I think similarly how the majority parents tend to be all up in the meetings and advocating. I would do the same thing too because that's within my
Yeah.
right. And I think oftentimes as well, I don't even want to make this assumption that it's often like um parents of color that are not involved, because that's not true. I think again at the basis everybody wants what's best for their children, but they either work or they don't have the time. I think again, I think we all want what's best for our kids. So I think I'm leaning more so to living in a majority black neighborhood. If that isn't the case, going more so like in a white neighborhood, but supplementing that with some extreme some extreme we here like woke education. I know some people hate that term, but I guess that's what,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
woke
hate that term because I feel
woke
like it's been
education.
co-opted.
I mean, yeah, people have co-opted it, but yeah, Jaretta's woke education curriculum.
All right. Maybe I'll have to implement it, or you can come here and implement
Yeah,
it
no,
for
I
your
mean,
nephew.
I am totally not opposed to coming to the house and just being a family, because I think it will also help him realize too that he's not alone. And then there has been a lot of studies done where black boys, black women, I think like in their adult years who have grown up in majority white spaces have talked about like that isolation. So I think getting ahead of that early makes all the difference.
All right. Well, thank you, Auntie. I can't wait for him to partake in the woke curriculum.